Hello, America. Last time, we talked about what exactly happened at the Capitol, why I think it meets the criteria for insurrection, and how I think we got to this point where our country's beliefs seem so far apart from each other. Today, I wanted to get more specific about Trump. Democrats and some Republicans want him gone for what they see as his role in the insurrection last week. On the other hand, many Republicans say an impeachment will do more harm than good. So today, I want to talk about whether Trump should be removed from office, and if so, how. So here's how I think about it. Democrats already have several articles of impeachment introduced, so let's start with that and work our way backwards. Let's just assume impeachment is the right move for now. There's a few different versions of the articles of impeachment from different representatives, but I think all of them miss the key point in one way or another. The one from Sheila Jackson Lee is all over the place. It includes everything from Russia to slowing down the post office to his frivolous lawsuits. Whether or not she's right to criticize him on those, it's a huge free gift to Trump, his supporters, and the Republican Party for the impeachment process. This version of the articles of impeachment doesn't seem too popular, so I won't get into my full rationale for that unless this version picks up more steam later. Most of the other versions are more focused, but generally center on inciting the insurrection. I think that's a terrible approach too. Incitement is really hard to pin down. It's like a mob boss saying, "Sure would be a shame if anything were to happen to the star witness testifying tomorrow," and trying to prove that was an order to murder the witness. Was it an order? Yeah, almost definitely. Can you actually prove it? It's really hard to. As flimsy as it is, they still have some plausible deniability. And in politics these days, that's all you need to get away with something. Telling people they have to show strength, or they have to fight, or that other politicians are enemies, has that same kind of wiggle room, because it could be argued that politicians on both sides have been using similar language for a long time now. You need to be able to prove he directly encouraged them to take an illegal action for this to really be indisputable in the eyes of the public and during the impeachment proceedings. But I do see two much stronger cases for impeachment that would get a lot more bipartisan support. There's zero interpretation, they're 100% provable solely based on Trump's own public statements, and they're centered around the single issue Republicans finally broke with Trump on. First is still incitement. Not for the insurrection, though, but specifically for Mike Pence to reject the ballots. Trump had very clearly tweeted, "Do it, Mike. This is time for extreme courage." And it's easily provable as counter to the Constitution and the powers of the vice president. Second, dereliction of his duties and oath of office in response to the insurrection. So with that second one in mind, let's walk through the chain of events again in more detail. Clashes with police started around 1 p.m. Police lines were breached almost immediately. Trump made his first statement over an hour after that at 2:24 p.m. after the insurrectionists were inside the building. The statement he made was to encourage them by reinforcing the reasons they were attacking the Capitol, saying Mike Pence failed to protect our country and Constitution, and reiterating the election fraud claims that started this. The wording of this tweet sounds like pretty intentional targeting to me, but even if it wasn't, that still points an angry insurrectionist mob who's already in the building at the vice president. Trump's next message, about 15 minutes later, did not ask his supporters to stop or leave. He just said, "Remember, the police are on our side, so be peaceful." Another half hour later, he sent another tweet with the same message, slightly more clear about no violence this time, but still geared entirely towards not hurting law enforcement. Nothing about the main elected officials in the building who are the actual targets of the insurrectionists. So far, there's been no indication, much less request, that he wants this to stop. The only signals he sent one way or another by this point was to point their wrath towards Mike Pence. Finally, at 4:17 p.m., more than 3 hours after the insurrection started, he sends a very brief video that calls for his supporters to go home. About 3/4 of that message is still reiterating the insurrectionists' cause and supporting them. His next tweet at 6 p.m. very clearly supported the insurrection. After this tweet, we wouldn't hear from him or his office until late the next day. If he had just failed to respond at all, that would have been a negligent enough dereliction of his office as it is. But he actively encouraged the insurrectionists after they entered the Capitol. And this is all just based on what we know publicly from Trump's own words. This isn't even considering behind-the-scenes things, like reports that he was excited to watch it, or that he refused additional support to help stop it, or the reports that police presence was reduced despite well-known threats and a massive planned rally. and that his team was still calling congressmen to try and get them to overturn the election while they were in hiding. So even if you ignore all those additional stories, his own words and lack of action is a massive, clear-cut dereliction of his oath to the Constitution. To me, that's an open and shut case. Personally, combined with his reshuffling of military leadership that made no sense at the time, I think it's pretty clear this was a coup, but I'm not going to dig into that fight right now. We should at least be able to agree that he grossly abandoned his duties as president during a very credible insurrection in our nation's seat of government. Now, he started out just assuming he should be impeached, so let's take a step back. If we wanted to remove him, would the 25th Amendment be better than an impeachment? Should he even be removed from office at all with only about a week left? Would it actually do any good, or would it just divide and damage the country even more? Short answer is, he should be removed from office and impeached quickly. But let's talk about the rationale, starting with how to remove him. I think the 25th Amendment option is not the best option, but would be justifiable. The 25th Amendment was pretty clearly meant for when the president is incapacitated. How it's written, though, is that it's for when the president is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office. I think you could easily make the case that through either his own temperament or character or unwillingness, that he's not able to perform his duties as president, such as effectively responding to an insurrection or supporting the Constitution. Don't get me wrong, I love the expediency if the president presents an immediate danger to the public, and I think you could justify it from how the amendment is worded. But overall, I'm against this option because I think it's a bit of a slippery slope when you start expanding the definition of an amendment away from what it was pretty clearly originally intended for. Therefore, I support impeachment over using the 25th. But should he be removed from office at all? Republican politicians and pundits are taking the view that, look, it's over, we'd just be doing more damage to the country, and there's no point because he's only got like a week left anyways. I consider myself conservative, and I try and see the valid points on all sides to try and come together. That's a big part of what this channel's about. But what does damage the country even mean? That the president's supporters will be upset? If you're worried his supporters are going to be upset that you're holding someone accountable for abandoning their post and supporting insurrection, you have a much bigger problem, and that is not a valid reason to skip the accountability phase. What happened to the party of accountability? What happened to the party of law and order? What happened to the party of facts over feelings? Why are they the special segment of the population whose feelings matter? Because if you don't hold the president accountable, a lot more people are going to be upset, so why choose to side with people making excuses for insurrection? Or, when you say damage the country more, are you worried there will be more attempts? Literally less than a year ago, we shrugged off potential terrorist reprisals when we assassinated Soleimani. We can't be afraid of them. We don't negotiate with terrorists, we said. If the terrorists and extremist elements are from our own side, they don't get a pass. They don't suddenly become worth negotiating with and giving some concessions just to keep them happy. So no, I don't think damage to the country and division is a good reason not to remove the president. Now, what about the other side of the equation? Is there a benefit to it with the president leaving the office in about a week anyways? Absolutely. First, accountability. And yes, I'm partly referring to the president who facilitated and encouraged an insurrection, stripping him of his office and multi-million-dollar post-presidency perks and preventing him from being able to run again should all be a given. But I'm also talking about our representatives. This was a significant event, and we need our representatives on the record about what they believe and where they stand here, not in little weasel sound bites through late-night talk shows or Twitter. There needs to be an official record of this. Second, information. People like Matt Gaetz and Laura Ingraham were already sharing blatantly fake news about Antifa infiltrators the night of the insurrection, and lots of people still believe it. So again, the official record is important for information and evidence, like the kind an impeachment and trial provide. Third, related to accountability, we need to rebuild the credibility of the United States after this. I'm all for the concept of America first, but we can't be America only and still be effective. As great as we are, we still need influence and credibility with our allies and other nations to effectively deal with adversaries like Iran, China, and Russia. And if other nations see that we're willing to just blow past the crucial step of investigation and accountability, our credibility and influence is going to stay crippled. Fourth, also related to accountability, we need to send a message to our people that no matter who you are or what office you hold, insurrections against the government are wrong, and that there are consequences for facilitating one. People are getting a lot of mixed messaging right now, especially from the right. We fully condemn the attack on the Capitol, but also your country was stolen by the people in that building and you have to keep fighting to take it back. The message needs to be clarified by action, and it needs to condemn people who had a role in this. Finally, there's still a lot of damage that can be done with the powers of the president. Some Republicans may think he's contained, they may think they've made some kind of deal with him to just stay quiet until this all blows over, but you're taking a huge risk with your own political careers, not to mention us. We admire Trump's drive to win at all costs, but it's a double-edged sword. You really think a guy like that can't use the next week to do some real damage, whether that damage comes during the next week or sometime during the next 4 years? So there are lots of positive reasons to remove, and I don't see any good rationale not to, like the damage to the country or more division arguments. Now before we close out, I have to acknowledge that there are a lot of good questions about hypocrisy all around, and we'll look at those in future videos. For example, did the liberals encourage BLM rioting? Or did the police respond differently to the insurrection versus black protesters? Good questions, all worth asking, but there's a time for that. Yes, we should absolutely talk about those other things and hold people accountable for them if needed. But the US president supporting an insurrection that still has a ton of support should be our top priority right now. Don't let pundits and politicians decide your priorities for you, because they're just going to use that to deflect accountability if you let them. Part of me can empathize with Republican politicians right now, I really can. Right or wrong, a ton of your supporters are still backing Trump. But part of being an elected official is knowing when to follow your constituents and when to lead them. Right now, they're being led by someone who doesn't have their best interests at heart. And this is an opportunity and your responsibility to them and to your country to step in and show them what good leadership is, even the people who may not realize it in the moment. Thanks for listening. In future videos, we'll touch more on some of those questions we mentioned about hypocrisy, so don't forget to subscribe to catch those. I'll see you next time.